Good morning. Friends, you remind me of my congregants. When we start the service, they will sit far at the back, even though the front part is almost empty. So, Gregory and your colleague there, please come closer. Let's just have a more integrated gathering here, sitting together. Friends, firstly, we have to start because we don't want to keep you later than 12:30. But firstly, thank you very much to Stellenberg for hosting us. We wanted to have this particular gathering at Andrew Murray, Braam, but our arrangements didn't work out exactly. And so we shifted it here and they were gracious to accommodate us today. Secondly, church leaders and representatives from the churches and the different parties, you that are present here, academics, thank you very much for making time to be with us. Brothers and sisters, I have to converse now in English here in Stellenberg. my language is Afrikaans, but still, let's try to accommodate everyone. So thank you very much for your presence and making time for this, which is a very, very important development. Everyone, the commentators say that we are entering probably the most critical period after 1994, this coming election, and especially afterwards in 2029. So all of us have to put in the energy and the reflection necessary to consider what is happening and ask ourselves about the role and the place of the church in this whole matter. Unfortunately, so many, I can assure you, friends, from the colored and black community side, many ministers are often overwhelmed by work. And so they don't always have the time to really get involved and drive processes that are necessary in our country. We have to deal with that. If we do not invest the necessary time in the representation of our country politically, we will be in very, very big trouble very soon. And as you know, we are already to some extent. To our speakers, thank you very much, colleagues, for your presence. Reverend Derrick Marco, he worked in the IEC for many years, and he will introduce the logistics of the elections. I think it's Professor Erwin Schwella, is that correct? Doctor, Professor? He will give us an overview of the manifestos of the biggest parties. That will stimulate very interesting discussions. And then, of course, we also invited Dr. Ruben Richards, who is, at the moment, representing his particular viewpoint and movement in the Cederberg, Ruben? Cederberg. We felt that we need an independent that will speak from his particular angle and perspective and look at the development in the country. And then, in the second part, we will then, as church leaders, reflect a little bit on what is happening. So, thank you very much to everyone. Braam has already said we will try to keep you not later than 12:30. So, dear friends, let us just bow our heads and then we will start. Heavenly Father, you have given us this day, and we thank you, Lord, for your wonderful provision that is always abundant and enough. Every day we experience that you guide us and you inspire us. And Lord, we are often amazed by how you carry your church through very dire situations. We had so many hopes for this country, South Africa, and still, Father, we cannot abandon it because you are present. But Lord, we are deeply disappointed about the developments over the last couple of years, especially amongst the ruling party. And Father, we cannot avoid the challenges that we must face and begin to deal with. And I pray that you will empower your church to be able to make a very critical input on the developments, and that you will use, Lord, employ the resources of your church and your spirit through the church to be able to influence the direction of our country. Father, help us to understand our proper role and not to turn away from the challenges, the tasks that we must face. Hemelse Vader, baie dankie dat U vir ons hierdie nuwe dag gegee het. Elke dag van krag en gesondheid en die liefde van ons families, Here, is 'n enorme voorreg. En ek bid, Vader, dat U verheerlik sal word in alles wat ons doen en dink en begeer en nastrewe. Dankie vir hierdie ruimte wat ons vandag kan gebruik en elkeen wat hier teenwoordig is. In Jesus naam met danksegging. Amen. So, lieve vriende, dear friends, I have the program in front of me. I hope it's not yet on the screen. Let us kick off. We will ask Dr. Braam to give us a short presentation. That was done by Dr. Tiens Elof on scenarios for the 2024 election. Braam, over to you.
If we can just get that one on the screen. Friends, I'm really going to be very short, 5 minutes, just to give you an overview, but maybe may I start by saying I don't think I've ever seen a time before an election, and I see Dr. Lionel Lowe here. We've worked in ECOC for many years. I don't think I've seen a time in history when everything was so volatile, in flux, uncertainty. Even the predictions is really, really very uncertain. So we're not going to try and give you a final answer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the slides very quickly. Last week, Dr. Tiens Elof did a presentation at the NG Kerk Modderramen. I've reduced it, and the time frame, I'm not going to go into the time frame for the elections. Maybe, Derrick, you will touch on it. So I'm not going to go there. Points of departure, and this is a very important one for this discussion this morning. We're not pro or against any political party. So as a church, we want to clarify that. But we're in search of a political order that will serve the interest of all South Africans the best. Very important to say this. And I think being the church, it's an important one. There are so many organizations going around, Social Justice Assembly, Kagiso Trust, My Vote Counts, Defend Our Democracy, Convergence for SA. You see the list. Just to confirm, I've never seen so much action before an election in all my years since 1994. When we look at scenarios, it's very uncertain. The polls, the predictions, when we come to the ANC, gives us anything between 38 and 52%. So it's a 14% uncertainty. The DA, anything between 18 and 32. The EFF, 12, 18. But what we see, a divided ANC and a rural ANC, and some other questions. I'm not going to go into the detail. We can discuss this afterwards. Tiens gave 4 scenarios. The one is the ANC less than 50%, but above 47%. And there are different permutations. Then they pick up a coalition with the smaller parties and just go on as before. ANC below 45, but above 40%. Then a coalition with the IFP, maybe even the EFF comes into play. There's an interesting one. ANC below 45%, maybe a government of national unity. But friends, let me confirm again. It's all very uncertainty. And then below 40%, either a grand coalition with the DA, or the ANC below 35, then current opposition coalition forms a new government. But even that will be difficult. It's going to be, so just to confirm, an uneasy landscape that we're looking up. We look into the local elections, maybe That's the more important one, 26. And when we started with Convergence for SA, we said, maybe we must not be fixed at the 24 elections. It's almost the journey beyond 2024. And going into the local elections in 2026, currently we're looking at a real possibility that the ANC will lose all the metros by 2026. Now you can just figure out the real possibilities if we see the trend that we see at the moment, and then obviously scenarios for the 2029. And I'm not going to, for the sake of time, not going to go into the details. Almost like a three-phase transition. ANC loses Gauteng, KZN, and Western Cape this round. It's a real possibility, even in coalitions. 2026, all the metros. And then 2029, then we probably, there's a possibility that we will have a real new government. The role of civil society, and I'm almost done. Not party political, keep all parties accountable. Many NGOs, but unfortunately not enough synergy. 1 million new voters already registered, which is Barling, Tulian, all the work that they've done. Voter education, voter turnout, and election monitoring. What can the church do? I just want to give this picture, and I'm almost done, Peter, and then we will get back at the end and close the circle. We must create awareness. Wherever we go, we must create awareness. And I'm so glad that we've got the media here, and you will send out just to say, we're not party political, but this is a kairos moment for the church and the country. So how do we create this sense of awareness? The second one, the physical assistance on the voting day. Move people, elderly people, people not interested. Not everyone can jump into a car and just go to a polling station. So the physical, help people with value-driven decision-making. Some good sermons on how to make a value-driven decision. Value-driven, vote according to your conscience. Vote according to your conscience and not your interest. And then prayer for the elections, prayer for safe elections, prayer for peaceful elections. We already see people being killed all over the country, shot, KZN. So it could become very complicated. And then election monitors. I think maybe, Derrick, you will get to it. There are still possibilities that we can mobilize church members to serve as election monitors. And I had the privilege to, as part of ECOC, serve as a monitor. And I can really just say, if you never had the chance to serve, you see the real South Africa when you go into the polling stations, but not only here in Stellenberg, in Durbanville, but in the deep rural, in Khayelitsha, all over. In a day like that, you get a snapshot. If you go to Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha and Stellenberg, of the real South Africa and the incredible diversity of South Africa. So, can an election be stolen? My final picture, yes. They do it through constitutional change, not likely in South Africa. They do it through bullying, and I've seen it with my own eyes in Zimbabwe. And they actually steal the ballots. They put ballots in boxes, and I've seen it with my own eyes. Alan Busak and I, we were in Zimbabwe just after that election, and I saw with my own eyes a building where the votes were lying in boxes for 3 months until they concocted a result, which gave Mugabe another round. So it happens. So, and that's it. Just to, I'm done. Just to give you some sense of where we are, what we're busy with, what is at stake, and like I said, it's an interesting time that we're in.
I think, Braam, thank you very much. You set the table for the following discussions. Now, friends, we decided that we will really try to bring it down to earth, and therefore we invited Reverend Derrick Marco. Now, Derrick is a minister of URSA, but he is really an outstanding person in that he's the one person that I know of that worked in Africa in the field of election monitoring and support in Nigeria, in Uganda. So Derrick, and the last couple of years in South Africa as part of the Electoral Commission. Derrick, thank you very much for your presence. You will take us forward. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Braam set the tone, but I will try and stick to my slides. And it's really discussion points and preliminary comments that I'm making this morning. I think we're trying to capture what has happened, and we're also trying to look at what is going to happen moving forward. So it's preliminary comments that is being made. And I cover a few things. Some of it you covered now under what I call context. And he said I can move it myself. There we go. So this is my content. Context, security, different interests, something on observers, something about the legislative framework for these elections, and the logistical arrangements, the electoral timetable, and then tasks that needs to be completed. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to stay on this one so that we don't have to struggle with anything. The context that we find ourselves in, brothers and sisters and friends, is a context what I call, and it's become now well known, it's called VUCA, vulnerable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's the context that we're operating. It is vulnerable because it refers to the speed of change and transformation that's taking place in this country, but across the world, and so we are very vulnerable, but it is something that we must look at in the bigger context only than South Africa. It is uncertain because the extent to which we can confidently predict the future is not that clear. The more uncertain the world is, the harder it is to predict, and it is difficult to predict. Even in our scenarios that we are trying to present, it is difficult to predict. It is complex, and it's extremely complex, the number of factors that we need to take into account, their variety, and the more complex the world is, the harder it is to analyze. And then it is ambiguous, it is vague, because there's a lack of clarity about how to interpret something, and the more ambiguous the world is, the harder it is to interpret. So, just to give you a visual idea of what it looks like, high volatility, that's where we find ourselves in, also in South Africa. High uncertainty, there's a whole lot of uncertainty, and people withdraw. There's indifference and apathy as well. And then there's high complexity. You can see the way in which the complexity plays itself out within our context, leading up to these elections, but also beyond. And then there's quite a high level of ambiguity as well. The second thing, and so VUCA is something that I want you to just hold on to, because if we think we're going to have an easy ride, there's so much more. But the second very critical area that we need to look at is the area of security. Now, under normal circumstances, you would look at can I see whether I can do that? Yes. We would look at SAPs, voting stations, and SAPs protection and movement of material. That is normal security during elections. In these elections, we have criminality intertwined into formal politics, a discussion that I don't think we necessarily have always publicly, but it's something that we need to explore. And this criminality doesn't only lie at the level of street gangs, but it also lies at the level of high groups or organized crime syndicates that's operating in our country. But this criminality, our concern is that this criminality is beginning to get access into the formal political arena. And so it is not as simple as only operating at the level of electing a political party. Let's be clear about that. Another question of security is the question of misinformation and disinformation. The social media sends out different kinds of messages. We know how people can be mobilized, and we know how deceptive information can be when we're sending out half-truths. And so a second level of security, and I think institutions that have systems in place that can actually track social media things and so on, it is important that we begin to develop and build that out in a much more particular way. Destabilization, when results are released, there are party threats and there are voices coming out. We don't know how deep that level of threat is, but we do know there is the capacity to mobilize people, mobilize voters, but also mobilize what we would traditionally call the lumped proletariat and just get them to move and destabilize the situation. So, and then there's the cyber tampering. I tested this with the Electoral Commission, and they were telling me that it is very difficult to do tampering of election results because we're quite a simple, still very basic paper type trail of results, so it's going to be difficult to do that, but we keep it at the back of our head. And then we have SAPs that must do the voting station, SAPs that must protect the security material. Community volatility is always present, and we know that as a result of community volatility, people don't go to the voting stations. You can't in Hanover Park and in Manenberg, if you live in this side of the road and you don't live on that side, one gang controls this side, another gang controls that side, and if you're on that side, you can't get to the voting station on the other side. But we also know that there are international interests. Further, with regard to security, and I'm quickly moving through this, the IEC is limited in its security, especially relating to its operation. So what the Electoral Commission does, something that we are consistently talking to them about, they say our perimeters are those very basic and clearly defined roles and responsibilities of an Electoral Commission. So they confine themselves to rolling out an election and ensuring that there's an outcome. That is where they confine themselves. I think that's a limitation. I think it needs to be opened up. It's something that needs to be worked on. And so the basis of their security principle is the code of conduct for different stakeholders, and that is out there. And we use that to engage political parties, and they use that to engage others as well. SAP's responsibility is also limited, because SAP simply says, while the Electoral Commission works on the inside perimeters, SAPS primarily works on the outside perimeters, and they don't necessarily focus on these deeper issues, and it's something that I think needs to be looked at. One of the limitations, I think, beyond SAPS and the Electoral Commission is the importance and the presence of civil society groups in tracking and monitoring and engaging. ECOC is an example of that, where they actually engage with different groups and individuals and parties. And something that we need to think of as the church is to say, what do we do in terms of this level of engagement, so that there's another level of sensibility in the electoral process itself. I'm just going to run through this, but I want to say, you touched on it, but there are different interests. Just within civil society, I call it fragmentation. I've never seen civil society as fragmented as it is now. It is fragmented under different interest groups and also sources of income and sources and streams of resources. So there are economic interests driven by corporate business, it is there. The political interests overlapping these economic interests, it is there. The new liberal capitalist driven interest, it is there and it's in our face. And while these interests can be placed in a broader rubric or context, I separate it because it provides an awareness of the games being played. Brothers and sisters and friends, there's a deeper set of games being played that is not about do we vote and what is the result, but how we attain power, and it is playing itself at a big but a deep level. And my concern, again, right at the bottom, should be how this fundamentally go against the grain of unity. And if we as church is very serious about the notion of unity, which is a biblical concept, then we need to ask, how do we break those racial divisions and how we bring together? I sat in one meeting where I said, I don't feel welcome in that space, simply because that space was defined by a certain group and it was defined by a particular interest. And I say this to you as church leaders today, we need to be so conscious of the divisions and the fragmentation and the breaking of unity and the destruction of what we would have called and what we were at some time still calling racialism. It's no longer there. And so something quickly on observers before I get to the timetable. Observers presents and they provide trust. They provide confidence. They provide security. And if you were there in 1994 and you were at the polling stations, then you know when there were citizens, observers with their little jackets and their little sweaters, then I trusted the process and people were calm. Irrespective of the reports that's going to be written, some of them also tweaked with depending on the interest that we want to follow. The observer's first and primary role is to provide trust, confidence, and also provide a certain level of security to people coming to the voter station. If I see you there, I know it is okay, and I can be part of that process. And that's why the call for us to observe this process is so critical, so that we can provide that level of trust and confidence. And I want us, as the more affluent communities, to think about how you integrate your resources, not only money, people resources, into the activities in our different communities as well. It's going to be a critical discussion over this period of time. We need one another's presence in this electoral process. I'm going to step off observers because it's something that I think we're going to talk about in the future again. And I want to say simply that the legislative framework for these elections are, again, South Africa is signatory to many international conventions promoting democracy and human rights. It's there. The IEC, or the Electoral Commission, is one of the Chapter 9 state institutions and supporting constitutional democracy, and it is there. There is the establishment and the governing principles of these Chapter 9 institutions, and there are some of them that we have in front of us. And these institutions are independent. I was on behalf of an organization, I was in Zimbabwe now, in these elections. And when I looked at the Electoral Commission, I said, they are on paper, they are in control, but they weren't in charge. Or they were in charge, but they weren't in control. Everything was in place. But when you actually saw how this thing unfolded, then the Electoral Commission actually stepped out of the space. People were there, but they weren't managing that process in a way that you could say the Electoral Commission was independent. So 2023 elections in Zimbabwe was a failure because the Electoral Commission couldn't operate as an independent institution. The same with the DRC, December 2023, another collapse of our electoral process. I can't see it happening here because we have everybody here, we have a lot of leaders, we have so many political parties, and there's a much more freer space in which to operate. But I don't think we must underestimate the importance of the independence of the Electoral Commission. I'm going to come back to this conversation a little bit later, but I want to caution the way in which we speak about the Electoral Commission is also critical. The way in which we engage them, it's critical. We must engage them, but don't go around just blacklisting them and making them look as if they are incompetent. There's a bunch of people out there, and I've been part of them for 12 years of my life, and I think there are smart people there that is really holding electoral democracy in this country together. We need to hold their arms high. I'm going to skip this because it simply deals with a little bit more on the timetable, and I want to move to the electoral timetable. And I want to just say a date that we all know now is the 29th of May. Write it in your calendar. Skryf it op your hart. Write it on your heart. And there are special votes in this country that will be held on the 27th and the 28th of May. And then normally we should expect results within 3 days. Saturday, the 1st of June, normally. But the Electoral Commission actually has 7 days. And I think that every time they shoot themselves in the foot to try and achieve the 3-day mark, because they are not doing a decent job to really get those results in the proper order quite often. So let me give you a little bit of insight into those people working at the voting station. If you just work this out for yourself. On the 27th, which means on the 26th, they are busy working, packing for the 27th and getting ready. 27th, they are there. The 28th, they are there from 8, I think, to 5. The 29th, they are there from 7, which means they must be there at 5 o'clock. And they work through till 9 o'clock. And then calculate this. From 9 o'clock, they must start counting. Now, picture anybody that is logically working for close on to 72 hours. My biggest concern, and I say it all the time publicly, my biggest concern is the problem of fatigue. And if we can be there when people start counting, don't observe the electoral process. It's easy. It opens at 7, yes. It runs through till 9, yes. But be there when you see those people falling apart, and they see them literally falling apart. I leave it with you, something that you want to discuss, because as soon as those 8, 10 people fall apart, those political parties have sent in fresh people. Then they create so much chaos in a voting station. So this is the timetable, dear friends, brothers and sisters. This is the timetable. Why isn't, I'm pressing the wrong one. There we go. This is the timetable. What I did with the big timetable that is so ridiculous to work through because they give you every date, I've broken it down into 4 categories. And the categories are voters' roll, candidates, the important notices, and then I made some comments. On the voters' roll, if you go all the way down to March the 12th, which is tomorrow, then the roll will be certified. That roll that is certified tomorrow will be the voters' roll that will be used for this election. So tomorrow, the 12th of March, the voters' roll is closed. Opportunity was given to do objections, to review the objections, and today they do the reviewing and the final review of objections, and they inform people, and tomorrow the voters' roll will be closed. So whatever voters' roll is out tomorrow, that is the certified copy with which we work. I want to say something about the voters' roll because in 2019 we had 26-point-something million people on the voters' roll. I just checked again this morning. In 2024, we only have 27 million plus. What does it mean? We have a voters' roll with all the hard work that went into it of less than 70% of voting age population. I think we're looking at between 68 and 69% of people that can vote have not registered to vote, which means the largest part of our young population that have never registered have not registered for this election. In fact, on the one hand, we can almost positively say, and this is the way it is being projected, we have 27 million over 26 million. In another way, we can say almost negatively, we have less people participating that's registered for this election. And that is why it's so important to encourage everybody to go and vote if you are registered. It's a little bit of a bucket of water that we're throwing on ourselves, but we need to know that this is what we are faced with. I haven't done a study yet, but some of you would want to do a study in terms of the proportion. How much of those voters are in rural areas, how much of them are in rural provinces, and how much of them are actually located in the metros and in the cities. That would be an interesting study, and then also maybe a better study on the age population and so on. The second one is the candidates. Now, on Friday, March the 8th, the list had to be submitted. By March the 8th, I have never received so much WhatsApp messages trying to explain the candidate list. And I was saying to myself, this is the beginning of a process that only ends, look where it ends. It ends there on the 12th of April. On the 12th of April, a month from now, after cleaning and sorting itself out, there will be clearly defined candidate lists and people will receive certificates. Colleagues, don't let us run with half-truths. Don't let us interpret. Don't let us try and deal with the situation almost before it is done. If you want to engage, you can engage. If you want to raise issues, you can raise issues. You have the time. Make use of the time. Don't walk around and start condemning just for the sake of sounding smart. So I want to say that candidates, the whole process is the 8th of March, the submission of lists that has taken place. On the 18th of March, the Electoral Commission will inform parties that they are not compliant or they are non-compliant, which means they need to submit certain things. On the 22nd of March, there will be multiple lists and that must be sorted and those lists must be revised by the 25th of March. And you go and look at the detailed one, you see much more activity, and it's only on the 12th of April. We have a window of opportunity as citizens to look at these things, to follow them, to raise questions, and to engage the Electoral Commission. Only after the 12th of April, we will have a sufficient, clearly defined list of whoever is going to participate as candidates, and then we can develop a ballot paper, and I'll mention something about that again. Just important notice, 15th of March to the 17th of May, IEC can be notified that you must vote outside, that you are voting outside of your district. So let's assume I registered to vote here at this church, but I know that on the 29th of May, I'm going to be in Houston. Please inform the Electoral Commission, Section 24A, timeously, that I'm not going to be here. You're not going to be able to vote in Houston or vote wherever you're going to be if you haven't done the Section 24A application that you move. Simply because you remember in 2022, more so in 2019, we had the difficulty of people going to any voting station. So I hear this is like a quiet year, and then I say, come. This is the best place to come and vote. And then we have a whole lot of people, while in terms of logistics, we have just made available 100 ballot papers because there's 70 people. All of a sudden, there's 300 people. What is the weakness? People say it's the Electoral Commission. It's not the Electoral Commission. It is our inability to actually stick to the rules of the game. So Section 24A, you've got 2 months almost to do this. Please make certain if you're moving to some other place that you're going to inform the Electoral Commission so that you can cast your vote. On the 12th of April, voting station names and lists will be formalized again. On the 15th to the 3rd of May, there will be special vote application. Please, brothers and sisters and friends, on the 15th of April to the 3rd of May, it's a long time. Our elderly, our old age homes, our people that are in difficult situations, please get that information to the Electoral Commission so that people can either vote at their home, vote at the old age home, or vote on election, or vote on those 2 days because they are not available to vote on the 29th. That's the special votes, and on the 24th of February to the 22nd of April, applying vote outside of the country. There's still a small window of opportunity for that. I'm almost done. Am I still on track? Still on track. Battery has gone here. There we go. So in my closing remarks, voters' roll stands at 27 million. I've mentioned that already. There are 300 parties that are registered, but they, as far as I can understand, issues of signatures, issues of money and payment will give us an indication of who are the parties that will contest. So it's definitely not going to be 300 parties. It's going to be much less. My biggest concern when everybody was talking about 300 is how the ballot paper is going to look. But it seems as if it's going to be much less, and so it's just a natural thing of you're not getting enough signatures or you don't have enough cash to make certain that you can participate. Independents, there are not that many up until now, but also they will also be placed under these constraints, and we hope that more of them can participate as well. I want to say this last point, recklessness with which people deal with information must be avoided. The playing field has been leveled, but make sure that information that you share with others is correct, and even make certain that that information that we have can bold and inspire instead of creating collapse of certain things. Numbers of people voting on foreign soil, there's less than 50,000 people, but they were telling me that if 50,000 people actually cast a vote in one place for one person or one party, then you will get one seat. So, you know, the emphasis that we place on our foreign voter vis-a-vis the emphasis that we must place on our local constituencies mustn't be unbalanced. So please make certain about that, especially if we are casting votes and or traveling out there. Observers internationally hasn't shown any real interest up until now, so we have all of these groups locally that are operating. There are some foreign missions that indicated that they want to participate in the polls, but they're not observers. SADC and the AU will be invited to participate, but I know that even that groups are so limited in terms of numbers. The final result is also very limited. Then just something very quickly on the ballots. You're going to have a national list. So there's going to be one national list, and that national list has 200 seats that you can vote for, and that's for the political parties, the same like our old previous list of 400 participants, 400 seats. So the national list has now been split. There's a national list and you vote for parties, and then there's a regional list, another 200, so it's 200 plus 200, and you vote for parties on this one, and for independents. So independents can also participate in the national legislature through that election. And then you have your provincial list in the Western Cape. We have 42 people in the provincial legislature, and it goes all the way up to 80. Depending on those numbers, you can participate. They did give us an indication, and I think that was one of the cases that was in court, that there will be a recalculation of votes and seats, and the votes that went to an independent will not be carried over to somebody else. So that is taken out of the equation. So we don't have to worry if somebody got 100,000 votes, what happens to the other 50,000, that falls away. And then, yeah, those are the other things that is important that I thought I will just mention. And then citizens' approach. I think we need to ask again the questions, colleagues, friends, how do we find these solutions? Because I think the church plays a critical role and has a critical voice with regard to independence, fairness, honesty, decency. We need to find solutions, how we can get our brothers and sisters and friends and the society to participate in these elections. It's important. How do we deal with matters and continue? And this is the other thing. How do we provide hope? Not only outside of this formal political space, but within this political space, we need to provide hope and direction. We must work harder. We need to build the nation again. And we need to achieve this and avoid fragmentation, which is deepening and creating further separation. We need to start challenging our politicians. We need to get them into spaces. And observers need to play a fundamental role as well. We can't only have 23,000 voting stations and only 500 or 2,000 or 3,000 observers. The presence of an observer, like I said, provides trust and confidence and security. We need to build that whole space for observers to participate and people to have confidence. I think I ran through most of the things that I wanted to. We can probably pick up the other stuff in the discussion. Thank you.
Derrick, thank you very much for giving us a very solid basis on which to discuss further this matter. I'm going to proceed immediately and hand over to Professor Erwin Schwella that will give us a summary of the manifestos of the biggest political parties. Professor Schwella, please tell us something about yourself also, and then you can kick off. I will allow 20 minutes, is that okay? Right, lovely.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I have been in academia for many years, amongst others at Stellenbosch University School of Public Leadership, and also at the Tilburg Law School of Tilburg University in the Netherlands. In both cases, I am an emeritus professor. I've done many things around currently socially innovative work with social entrepreneurship and social businesses. And currently, I'm just recently retired as a Dean of School of Social Innovation at Huguenot College, but I was appointed just before that for 2 years as an affiliate professor at the Department of Public Management and Administration at Free State University. So ek dink nie eintlik aan aftrede nie, ek dink maar meestal aan aantrede, né? Beter. And when I was at Stellenbosch, I once read a piece of graffiti at the business school campus where I was situated, which surprised me, but it didn't as well, because there's very little graffiti there. But it was at a hot air hand dryer. And the graffiti read, "Press here for a 2-minute speech by Erwin Schwella." Okay, right. So my speech is probably going to be more than 2 minutes and a bit less hot air than substance. First of all, when parties consider their manifestos, they obviously link it to the party's policy. There's got to be a link between the party and its policy and its manifesto. However, they also consider, of course, how they get voters to vote for them. You see, there are 3 things there. There's the party policy, there is the manifesto, and the intention of the manifesto is, of course, to get voters to come out and vote for them. Now, I thought I can give you a summary, but before I give you a summary, I want you to follow and do an analysis with me. So I would like you to think through what I'm saying and do an analysis with me. Now, the first question I could pose to you in this regard is, how many of you can name the correct names of more than 4 political parties in South Africa? Anybody? So that's good. There's somebody who's willing to volunteer to do that. Let's not go there. I sat and I quickly made a list of parties that are part of, thanks Derrick, you did an excellent job in explaining this in a very brief period of time. 300 parties contesting probably, but maybe we get to 200 after those dates are met or not met. Just think about the big ones. The ANC. Obviously, everybody knows about the ANC, the DA, which is the current official opposition, so we know about the DA. We know about probably the IFP, because it's a prominent party over many years. We would definitely, in some ways, have noted the Freedom Front. No, the Freedom Front Plus, but the Economic Freedom Fighters. So maybe there's an interesting connection there. the Patriotic Alliance, a newcomer party on the scene, and another newcomer party with no electioneering history, but currently making inroads, the Mkhonto Wesizwe party. Think about the independence with One South Africa movement, Rise Mzansi, and now we've not discussed the UDM, the PAC, and all of those parties, which we have some kind of a recall of, but they're all in there. Now, how do the parties go out to look at manifestos in terms of their party policies, but also to get voters to turn out and vote for them? It's generally linked to a set of, shall we say, aspirations. Aspirations is a fancy word for promises. If you vote for me, I promise you that you will get the following things. And this ranges more or less with all of the parties. The DA will say, listen, we're not going to take, because they are contested by people who give a particular slant to what they say, and that's part of political contestation. They will say, it is false that we will take all of the government grants away, because their opposition says they will take it away and we will give you more. So obviously that is highly contested and it becomes completely emotional and people believe more or less what they like. And this is another thing. Politics in some ways is about cui bono, the Latin words meaning who benefits. You may think it's about principles, but as Derrick so correctly pointed out, there's a lot of interests involved here. En soos ons sê in Afrikaans, waar jy sit is wat jy siet. Where you sit is what you see. You tend to see your own interests and how you can deal with this in terms of your own benefits and maximizing your benefits, which essentially means, sadly so, there are very little principles involved here. So the principles are few and far between. It's all about interests and promises. Now, I want you to take you through the analysis. In South Africa, being a highly diverse country and currently under huge amounts of stresses and strains, as Derrick also correctly pointed out, there's a lot of VUCA issues here. Complex adaptive problems or wicked problems. And that creates complexity. It makes decisions difficult. And then we should look at how parties position themselves. They've got their party policies, but they've also got the promises they need to make. And then the analysis becomes on what do they base their manifestos? On their party policies, but also on their promises, and they want to get voters out to come and vote. Now, the first set of things that they position themselves around is politics and the economy. And politics is linked to how do I gain and retain power. So it's about power. Economics is about money and privilege and benefit. And then you need policies which deal with the politics and the economics, and you need to link that to a set of promises in your manifesto. Now remember, South Africa didn't get here in a kind of a one lightning event. There is hundreds of years of history, and a part of that history, and we should say that, is apartheid, which was correctly and duly judged as a crime against humanity. Now, this is a church area. I will not say what that did to South Africa because it might involve an expletive words, which we don't use in this. Parties will position themselves in terms of power, and that links to an interesting set of concepts. You're either part of the rule of law or the rule of power. Now, here's the question. if you take just the first couple of parties, do you think the ANC is aligned to the rule of law, die rechtsstaat, or the rule of power, die magstaat? You decide. And you can, it's on a spectrum probably. The DA, is it a rule of law party, a rechtsstaat party, or a magstaat party? You decide. What you can say is, a party, and let's take the economic freedom fighters. Do you think they're a rule of law party or a rule of power party? And that will then play out in how they judge and how they write their manifestos. If they are a rule of law party and you decide, you will see in their manifestos that they for the separation of powers. They give an important role to the courts. They will look at the independent institutions of our democracy and say, like Derrick did, support these people. Don't malign them. The rule of power parties will not go there. They will criticize the judges. They would want to change the constitution. They would want to change the independence of the judges. They would in actual fact ascribe to the judges preferably not any forms of objectivity, but ascribe to them some interest base. So those are in the manifestos. Inevitably, you will see in the EFF manifesto, for example, there's a strong criticism of the judicial system. And what does that indicate in terms of where they see their interests are? They probably position themselves towards the rule of power rather than the rule of law. And other parties do it differently, and you can take any one of these parties and in actual fact position them, and you will see it in their manifestos. In some ways, you can start to predict their manifestos on the basis of where they are positioned in terms of these very important issues. A second issue in the politics and governance side is linked to the matters of whether they believe in more people's autonomy in a decentralized, devolutionary state. In other words, more power to the people essentially, but linked to the spheres of government. More to local government, less to central government. More to community-based organization and less to central government. And if they are very interested in centralizing, then it's probably because they want to have power, in a certain sense, concentrated in the hands of a centralized group of people so that they can use it, hopefully in the interests of all of the people, but often in a corrupt state, it turns out that they use it in actual fact to beneficiate another powerful elite. And you can go and have a look at how they act and what they do in that sense. The centralists do not want to devolve power. They want to keep it to themselves because it serves their corrupt purposes. They will even profess to be against corruption, but what happens in reality is different from what they say. So those are two dimensions. I can think of many more. As an analyst, I think of many, and I have to do the analysis in a sophisticated way, but these are trends. Do you think, for example, the patriotic, oh yes, there's another part of the politics. It is about whether they are more nationalist, in other words, serving a particular interest of a particular group, or whether they are more inclusive and, shall we say, in that sense, more broad-based. Now, if you take the EFF, are they nationalists or are they broad-based and inclusive? What will be in their political manifesto is forms of saying, we are about this group and we only look after this group. And essentially they will say, we are against those groups and we won't look after them. So they profess to be universalistic, but they are nationalistic in their core. And now you can ask where does the Patriotic Alliance fit in there? Where does the MK party fit in there? And if you go one step further, it's not only about excluding or including particular groups. We still have, can you believe it, the Population Registration Act. If I could, I would scrap it tomorrow. But there it is. So now you go beyond the old labels that we gave people. What was it? Black, and then black African, and then colored, and then Asian, and then white. You go to tribalism. So you say, I am, first of all, Africanist, and then secondly, if I'm MK, in my manifesto, I will probably try to work in something which works with the region of KwaZulu-Natal. And in the political system, it's also whether you are tolerant of the other. So you can watch what the manifesto says in promises is very different from what the real interests are and the dynamic that plays out in getting voters to vote for you. Take the economics quickly. Economics, you can either be market or state-orientated. By the way, Inkatha Freedom Party is an interesting party because they would, in political terms, have a strong base in a particular province, and that we have seen, and they would have an interest in mobilizing, in this case, Zulu-speaking constituents. On the other hand, they are strong on federalism. They have always been a federal party, saying that we want more power for the province. In that sense, they are probably close to the Freedom Front Plus. So there are interesting kind of shades of gray here. Economics, market or state. And once again, you can go and look at these particular parties. In the manifestos are, for example, the EFF, the ANC, and probably I would say MK, you would find much more state-oriented promises. The state will take away land from some people, even preferably without compensation, change the constitution, no rule of law, and will then in some ways redistribute that. So that is a strong state-based approach because people will not freely give up their land. So you need the state to legislate for it, and if you don't do it, they will force you to do it. So it involves a very strong state-based approach, which inevitably then runs in many ways against the idea of tolerance and liberalism and the rule of law. So, there's a lot of confounding issues here. So it's either state or market. And it's either redistribute or growth. So the political parties that are strong state-orientated with a sense of we don't necessarily work with the rule of law, we work with the rule of power. If we get a majority, then we will go for the opportunity to take from and give to. Therefore, not necessarily growth, but redistribution. It's just the logic. Now, we must be very careful that we say that that is wrong, because it's very easy to, where you sit is what you see, to then be critical of that. But if you are affluent, like I am, then there are certain things that you prefer in terms of the political economy. And then Derrick made one critical remark about one particular ideology, and maybe we could have the debate because I don't necessarily agree with him, but he was somewhat critical about the new liberal agenda. Now, I'm fairly critical about, shall I say, corrupt redistribution. We can have a difference of opinion on that, but there will be different political parties catering for those things, and you must make your choices. There's always this idea about also whether you have a socio-cultural link to your party policies and therefore your manifesto. So if, for example, you have a kind of an exclusive nationalism, and whether that involves something like some form of I listened very carefully because I did an analysis on SABC 1 TV about the PAC's manifesto, which of course comes from the tradition of Pan-Africanism. And that's great. I actually have a feeling for the collective ideals of people wanting to do good, and the PAC is intellectually strong. However, then I asked the case in the final analysis, if I wanted to become, and I'm a serious Pan-Africanist, would I be welcome in the PAC? How much diversity is there? Would I be welcomed? And said, well, as long as you subscribe to the way of Pan-Africanism, Africa first. I'm not sure about that, whether it plays out in behavior in that sense. So there's this exclusive nationalism, or shall we say, some form of an ism. The one thing that I've become very scared in my life of is any ism. Because ism gets you into ideology. And ideology is ideas impregnated by power. I prefer ideas rather than ideas with power. That doesn't mean that I'm a Schengeist. I'm a part of this country. I also have interests, and they are different from the diverse interests of other people. But we should be looking at this. Then one which is actually in today's burger, you can look at it, I've been talking about it for quite a while. In the socio-cultural regime, or thinking, or choices, or selections, there's a strong divide between modernism and traditionalism. Now, in some ways, if you take the Freedom Front Plus, and you look at their kind of approach, they are quite traditional in many ways. And they less so now. Remember, the Freedom Front Plus used to be the Volksfront Plus. Now they are the Freedom Front Plus, and they say they're looking after minorities. That's slightly more inclusive. But they have strong traditional values linked to Afrikaner values. The EFF tries to go beyond African values, but has a strong connection to values which is linked to some form of an Africanist agenda, but not so strong as the Africanist agenda of the PAC once again. So that means that we should not underestimate in South Africa the glue of what I call the primary affiliation. Difficult for me to come unstuck from that glue because I come from a particular background. I was an activist against apartheid since 1985, so prior to 1990. I trained the ANC in exile. I trained the State Security Agency for 3 or 4 years since 2013 to 2017, so I had to be security cleared for that. Until I made a bad comment about Arthur Fraser, and I was chucked off the farm. I don't train the State Security Agency anymore. So, sometimes you have to speak out against your own interest. But we should not underestimate, you will look in those manifestos, the parties who have a strong traditional point of view, in either an Afrikaner or Africanist perspective, will in some ways say that we will support traditional authorities. So no doubt, in a manipulative way, you will see that, in a province like Mpumalanga, they'll buy 50 bakkies and then give it to the traditional leaders. It's vote buying. It's just that. But it plays into a broader part of our very diverse culture. I am nearly concluded. So if you look at that, you get to the promises. Now, what the parties do is they then go with their party preferences, their party policies, plus looking at their view of the political economy, the role of the state, views of traditionalism versus modernism, but then there are also certain current realities which they need to speak to. And in all of the parties you will see there is then something which says we need to create much more jobs because there's a serious problem with unemployment. But how are we going to do that? We can either say 10 million or 2 million, but will we use the market or the state? And the DA will say we will use the market, and it's interesting that the IFP who came out yesterday will say that we will close the South African borders, force companies to employ 80% South Africans, no illegal immigrants, but there's no Pan-Africanism there. Because if you close the borders, even with walls, like Trump bills between Mexico and the United States, then obviously what are you saying? Where could these walls be? Will it be between South Africa and Germany? No, it will be between South Africa and Zimbabwe. So there's a traditional party with an Africanist perspective, but more inclined to work towards a Zulu nationalism. And they will then make promises accordingly. Every party wants to create jobs, but they will do different things to do that. The one will say we will put in a wealth tax, as some of them do. Others will say that we will redistribute land without compensation, as some of them do. And that depends on how they see their interests and how they position themselves in terms of with relatively emotional pleas, which is very little to do with evidence, with things that mobilize on the basis that in some ways, it's an ideology, it's linked to power, not in terms of professional evidence. And they will put that in their manifestos, and you will see it there. Let me start to conclude then. In South Africa, voting is still very much based. Some people go as far as to say it's an ethnic census. You don't vote, even your interests. You vote for the nearest clan to you. I think that's an overstatement. I would sort of soften it slightly, but voting behavior is often still based upon your primary affiliations. The language you speak, the interests you have, the family that you hang out with or the friends, the place where you go to church, the place where you go to a pub or a shebeen. It's your primary affiliations. That determines your voting behavior. That is also why it is so difficult to move South Africans into a more modernist rule of law democracy. But fortunately, constitutional democracy, if they are not changed due to some perverse motive, are learning organizations. Therefore, we need to go into Braam's second and more elections. We must learn to work with coalitions. Otherwise, it's not going to happen naturally. So we mostly vote our primary affiliations. How many of you have been convinced in the last 15 or 20 years to vote for another party than the one you initially voted for? And I assume you're a fairly modernist group of people. What I then think, finally, and in conclusion, is what must the church do? Now, I'm not a theologian, and I would have loved to be a theologian because I think any form of systematized knowledge and thinking is great. And I think theologians have a great contribution to make to understanding the world from a particular perspective. I'm trained in law, sociology, public administration, governance. That's my. So I often say I'm only religious because I'm so sinful. And then the theologians say to me, that's not such a bad theology. So, okay, I should be all right on that one. Point is, if I had to give churches and faith-based organizations, and this includes interdenominational, and I would also say interfaith-based approaches, because we should, you can sing your own songs, hymns in this church on a Sunday, or sometimes on a Saturday. But on Monday, you must work in South Africa as a South African and connect to South Africans of all backgrounds. And I see the particular, shall we say, credo of this congregation is over boundaries, oor grense. Okay, so that's important. Church advice. We should not support any party which explicitly excludes and divides. For me, it's as easy as that. If you tell me that you are only for these people, as a faith-based believer, that's not my faith. I'm only for all. Apartheid was slegs vir blankes. Our democracy should be slegs vir almal. And if parties make that division, if they create that division, irrespective of all of the things they want to give you and promise you, I think the church should say, if you divide, you're not part of us. We should cherish cohesion and confront division. I didn't give you all of the party political promises in their particular manifestos, but maybe you've got an improved understanding now of the political dynamics, how decisions are made, and why they are made. And I conclude with a saying, remember I said, who benefits? There's also an American political scientist who said that party politics and government is about who gets what, when, how, and why. And essentially, it is dividing the spoils of government. And in South Africa, it's even more so given our particular context. Complex, VUCA. Thank you very much.
The way we're going to do it, because Pieter will be part of the panel. So let me allow, I'm going to call him to come forward, Dr. Ruben Richards. Ruben is a fascinating person. I'm going to put it to you just like it is. I met him a couple of years ago, and we discussed his first book, Bullets or Ballots. Bullets or Ballots. He did his doctorate in Old Testament. He was the secretary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with Archbishop Tutu. Then he moved into the corporate world. And then after a while, he bought a farm in the Cederberg, Klein Willem area and started an independent movement called Cederberg Eerste, Cederberg First. And he became the first independent mayor of South Africa. So he's into politics, but he's independent into politics. So I want to really welcome him. And we've asked him a simple question, and he said he's going to do it very shortly to respond to what we've heard. What do we do this year? What do we do this year, this morning? So, Ruben, thank you so much for coming over to us, and over to you.
Thank you, Braam. You can say you're independent, but there's no such thing as independence. If you're married, you know it doesn't work. Okay, I'm going to put my timer on. Nou weet ek hoe dit werk. Okay, daar gaat hy. So, good morning. I think it's still good morning to all of you in the audience, and certainly good morning to those who are watching on screen. To rectify Braam just a little bit, I think I'm just an ordinary citizen of South Africa that believes that I can make a small contribution to improving our society. I have been blessed, and I acknowledge this, spiritually speaking, I have been blessed by God with a series of gifts and talents and skills, much like all of us. Perhaps just my toolbox has got a few more tools in it than yours. I get to do all sorts of interesting things, as Braam has mentioned. Let me focus on the task at hand. I am currently the executive mayor of the Cederberg Municipality. I'm the head of a group of people who will call ourselves Cederberg Eerste. Ons is 'n gemeenskapsorganisasie, 'n inwonersorganisasie. We are a residents association. We are not politicians, we are simple residents. I'm a business person. My fellow councillors are business persons. Lawyers, tax consultants, rooibos-teeboere, explosives engineer, medical doctor. I don't think there is a career politician in the group. And our interest is very simple. The interests of the people of the Cederberg come first. Punt en klaar. We hurriedly put this group together. I was bullied into participating. I'd like to think of myself as a citrus farmer. That's what I'm trying to do in the Cederberg. That's why I'm there. I didn't go to the Cederberg to become the mayor. I went there for business reasons to try and make money. No verlore geld. Want ek is nou betrokke in hierdie plaaslike regering goedes. But be that as it may, for my input today, I'd like to make 3 broad statements, perhaps 3 conceptual hooks, if you want to use that language. And perhaps I must take my brilla out just in case I get lost. But the first is that prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. Let me repeat. Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And if we're talking about the Manifestos, which is kind of a prescription, if you will, without proper diagnosis, you qualify to be struck off the roll. It's a very, very serious matter. And Derrick was careful to point out that we need to be sober when we look at processes in the same way that Schwella did. So, what is the prescription that people are wanting you to buy into? And my suggestion is get a second opinion. Get a second opinion. It's a good practice. Don't believe everything that you are told. The second, so that's the first conceptual look, and if we have time, we can come back and unpack it. The second is that in South Africa, I want to redefine the term social compact. My definition of social compact is what is the agreement that we have reached amongst each other as to how we will live together? The short answer is we agreed we would live in a thing and a system called democracy, where it's a one person, one vote in a unified South Africa. Very simple. Those are the rules. That's the agreement that we've made with each other through our leaders, through CODESA and other things. So the question is, what is the greatest risk to that vision, that ideal? And here's my second expression. You might call it my Rubenism if you want to, but this is how I express myself. So the greatest risk, in my view, to democracy is that we have too many people with too little to lose. We have too many people with too little to lose. You've got to have, in business language, you've got to have skin in the game if you want to do a good business deal. You can't be an innocent or passive bystander. You must know if I don't get involved here, I'm going to either lose or I'm going to win. There's got to be some skin in the game. And right there, I think, is the first disconnect. What does democracy presuppose? It presupposes that the citizens of the country are its shareholders. I want to use business language because I want to demonstrate the disconnect. If you're a shareholder, you understand that you're expecting dividends. You're expecting a return on your investment. And so what shareholders do is that they appoint a team of executives to run the business, to run the company. And in this instance, given the analogy, every 5 years, you get an opportunity to assess and then to either change your board of directors or to confirm that they've done a good job and they must carry on ruling the country, or in this instance, the company. Well, using that analogy, the current board of directors, also known as the African National Congress, have done enormously well because they've been elected back into office consistently over a period of 25 years for their performance. And you can't fault that. And that those are just the facts. And Braam's already getting uncomfortable in his chair. Well, Braam, you can't argue against me because those are the rules of the game. You get to use your ballot and not the bullet, which is the title of my book that you refer to, every 5 years. It's 5 or 4, 5 now. To choose a board of directors based on their performance. This time around, I think the board of directors should be a little nervous because their lack of performance is now quite public. And I speak from a municipality point of view. We were summoned as mayors, we were summoned by the Minister of Water Affairs to a conference in Johannesburg in January this year. And he lambasted us in front of everybody, told us to get up, stand up, talk about being on the red carpet. And why? What is the context? Well, the context is that more than 70% of the municipalities are not providing water of a good quality to the citizens of the country. Let me just let that sink in for a minute. Now, it's particularly relevant for me in the area where I'm the mayor. We're dependent on borehole water. Jy pomp die water uit die grond uit, jy moet hom skoonmaak en dan vir jou mense gee. Here you've got dams and things that provide you with water. But imagine that 70% of your water provision is substandard. That's just one example. So when we decided to compete in the local elections, we said, we are a group of people who are ordinary residents. We don't make any promises. Net daar is die eerste fout. I would stand on platforms. I'm making no promises. You're not getting a job once I become the mayor. Wena, you? No job for you. We only have 3 things that we want to achieve. We want clean water, clean towns, and clean administration. Punt en klaar. That's it. Get back to the basics. So with all the ideological talk and the promises and the manifestos, I don't hear any talk about getting the basics right. Do you hear any of the political parties talking about the basics? We can talk about market economy versus whatever other economy. Man, as jy nie water het, jy het nie 'n economy nie. We already don't have, well, let's not talk about that other word called L. You know, we have difficult words in our body corporate. There's the N word, the C word, now it's the L word, load shedding. We don't talk load shedding. It's a disgrace. But we have become so accustomed to load shedding, like that frog syndrome, where you drown in your own mess because you don't realize that the environment in which you are finding yourself, is changing and is toxic. So that's the second one. Look. Too many people with too little to lose. In other words, we need to build that middle section of society so they have skin in the game. Then the third comment, and with this I'm going to close, you get the government you deserve. Let me repeat it. You get the government you deserve. That's the name of this game. If you don't vote, don't tell me that you don't take responsibility for the outcome. Not voting or abstaining is a vote. And we're talking to church people here in the main. And so you have not just a spiritual responsibility, but a civic responsibility to exercise your vote. And I want to be, since it's church, Braam, I can take a little bit of liberties and say to you that if you don't vote, don't tell me that you're not happy with the government that's in power, because you have a chance to change it. That's number one. Number two, don't even try to justify, to disengage as in what I'm not going to be involved. You will suffer like everyone else if you have a bad government in power, because you had a chance to change it. So that's not an excuse. The challenge that we have is what I mentioned when I started. Citizens of South Africa, you are the owners of this country. Not the politicians. You, the ordinary citizen. Now let me help you a little bit, because I didn't grow up with a concept of being a shareholder. And right there is the first disconnect. You're asking people who have a mindset of being slaves to now have a mindset of an owner. And the church has done nothing to help us to bridge that. Because we are big on servanthood. So, okay, I'm touching on a theological issue here. But as citizens in a democracy, you are the owners of this country, and you appoint people to serve your interests. It's called a board of directors, it's called a president, it's called a cabinet, and so forth and so on. And they put together a management team to manage the country on your behalf, on the principle that they are there to serve the public. It's called the public service. Public service and administration. But do they act like they are off doing you a service? They act like they're doing you a favor. Huge spiritual crisis, in my view. So these are the three things that I wanted to share with you. Just briefly to summarize. Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. Get a second opinion. Don't just take the first prescription that you get, particularly if there's been no proper analysis. The second, we need to build that middle tier of our society so that we do not have too many people with nothing to lose. That's why they'll burn down the place. Hulle het niks om te verloor nie. And then thirdly, you get the government that you vote for or the government that you deserve. So don't complain. Don't complain and tell me, I don't know who to vote for, so I'm not voting at all. Pack your bag, get out of the country, because you do not deserve to be a citizen in South Africa if you have that attitude. I will give you a free visa out of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruben. Spot on. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to invite Pieter and Mbulelo and Gregory and Colin. And we're not politically correct here because the lady who was supposed to be on the platform, she cancelled at the last moment, unforeseen circumstance. If you would come and Ruben, don't go too far, so just stay there. If you will come to the stage, please. Greg, Mbulelo, Pieter, and Colin. What I'm going to do is, before we had enough talking from a front, any remarks, questions from your side at this point in time? No speeches, short remarks, questions from your, before you go, you wanted, Lionel, you wanted to say three things.
Yeah, thanks very much, Braam. I'm going to pick up on granddaughter at 12:30 private. I wanted to say that the responsibility in our congregations for ministers and those who influence what happens are three things. Firstly, that we say to the members of the congregation, get out to vote on the 29th. It's the first thing. The second thing, we have to explain the three ballots so that people understand that. Because I think that's going to be a very confusing thing come the 29th.
The three ballots, maybe Derrick, make a note of that. I think we must just come back to. So it's go out and vote. Explain the three ballots, and the third one was. You said there was a first one.
What's the third one?
Oh, the monitors. Yes,
Recruiting
very
monitors
important.
for
Very,
the
very
29th.
important.
I think those are three simple, straightforward things that every congregation should hear.
Yeah, yeah.
And it won't take a lot of time in a service or immediately after pronouncing the benediction. If a minister can just ask people to sit down and cover those three things, it will take you 10 minutes and move on. Thank you.
I thank you so
Sorry,
much.
I have to go.
Anyone else? Questions? Remarks? No one from the floor? Please, sir. Just your name and then question, remark.
My name is
Yes.
Ngosekaya, the surname is Lala. It's just maybe a question and a remark. There hasn't been such a long list of political parties that are readying themselves to contest an election, like it is the case now. And it has been said by a number of speakers there. And my question that has always been lingering in my mind is that a bad thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that really a bad thing? I have my own answers, which may not necessarily be correct. I'm mindful of that. But I think that that's the question I want to pose, especially in the context of certain levels of dissatisfaction by the citizenry. I mean, a number of surveys had alluded to that there's a lot of dissatisfaction. Also, there's not been a complicated election like this one. For instance, if you are, I'm a pastor, but I just happen to understand a little bit or to have an interest a little bit on politics. If you are a political party that is not represented in parliament currently, even if you used to be represented, but this time you are not represented, you need to have a certain number of signatures of voters in order for you to be able to contest, 1, the national ballot, 2, the regional ballot, 3, the provincial ballot. All those goes with signatures and with a lot of money involved. For instance, if you want to contest only the Western Cape, you need to have signatures of 7,176 people. So alone, if you want to contest the national ballot, you need to have 13,800 signatures. And you need to have roughly 245,000 just for one ballot. If you want to contest everything, you need to have roughly more than 700,000. So it's a lot of money involved. It's a lot of administration involved. It's a lot of complicated stuff. Some of the complications, in my view, has been established or created by parties represented in parliament, because they don't want to lose power. That's my view. But back to my question, is a proliferation of so many parties readying themselves to contest these elections such a bad thing in a democratic space?
Americans only have 2 parties, basically. That's bad? Well,
thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon. I would just like to ask, and in particular, Prof, coming out of lockdowns, etc., some of us were talking about the New World Order, which some see as a conspiracy theory, this globalist agenda. And as the church, for me, that should concern us, because obviously it's a subtle way in which some people try to bring an antichrist agenda into our nation and nations. So if political parties are aligned to it, it's a danger for the church. And I don't hear us talking about that and saying which political parties are really fighting against whoever is coming up against the Christ in us. Thank you so much.
this is a more direct question to the church. Are there parties aligning with a with a global agenda that's not really in line with what the church stands for. It's a difficult, complex one. But these are exactly, folks, the kind of questions that's on the table. And somehow we're hesitant to talk about it. Thank you for, I don't know who of the panelists will be daring to answer that difficult question. Anyone else? Any remarks? Any questions? May I just ask, I think, some clarity on how do we go about, if for instance, I have like 100 people in my congregation willing to serve as monitors. Is it possible? Where do they apply to be accredited? Must there be some training? I think we must just get this one out of the way. Derrick, do you want to answer that one? And maybe, and let's get that question out of the way, because I think that's an important one, and then we can go to the others. The 3 ballots, just say one sentence about the 3 ballots, because that's a confusing one. The 3 ballots and the monitors. Can we have a mic for Derrick, please? So it's not a ballot paper anymore, it's a ballot book.
On the observers, monitors?
Both on the yes. Can for instance, people are here, can yes. they still apply yes. to become monitors, and until what date, and is it a difficult process?
The application for observers, I think, is the beginning of May, but you can also link up with the Western Cape Provincial Council of Churches. They are reaching out to all churches to see whether they can actually build out their list way beyond the 500. So that is a vehicle through which you can actually
okay.
And you are connected to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Danielle, let's make it simple. We've got all the email of the people your contacts. What we will do within the next week, we will send out all the exact detail on how to become an observer.
Yeah.
And we will send it out to everybody so that if we can have, like, after to this little meeting here, another 500 observers, this would have been a success.
Absolutely.
We will do. And just before the 3 ballots, just say, because even I'm confused. There's now a proportional. In the old days, we had 2 ballots, one for national, one for province, 400 for national, and then for province. Now we have 3 ballots. Yeah. There's 200 national, and then this proportional. Just explain that to the people.
So the first ballot is provincial. It operates at exactly the same principle as in the past, except that on that ballot paper you will also have independent candidates. So you will have the political parties and independent candidates on that list. The national ballot has now been split. So that one national ballot is now split. We have 400 seats in national legislature. 200 of those seats you will vote for a political party, like in the past.
And an independent?
No.
Oh, okay.
Listen.
Yeah?
Yeah. The first 200 will be for political parties, like in the past.
Okay.
Right? That will be that ballot. And then the third ballot is what they call a regional ballot. Now, a regional ballot has independents and political parties. What is the difference between the regional ballot and the provincial ballot? The only difference is that it is called regional, but you will be voting in that province. So the region is actually one of the 9 provinces. So you have 3 ballots. The one is the normal, 200. The second one is the normal, local, provincial. For the Western Cape, we will vote for 42 seats. For Gauteng, they will vote for 80 seats, and so on. And then the third one is the second 200, and that provides independents with an opportunity to serve on the national legislature. There you will vote for an independent or for a party.
A regional member, and then proportionally, that will add,
yes.
make up the 200. It's still a complex one, I think, for ordinary people, to work it out. And maybe, Brad, you guys working with the radio, maybe you can invite some people to really explain it to the people, but this is and I think it's room for confusion. Absolutely room for confusion. People in the end, they will just go and bang, 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 and we don't know where you're going to end up. Right. Aaron, last one from you, and then we're going to move to the panelists here.
Thank you, Braam. I just want to be sure I'm not very clear. Observers and the peacemakers like us as a church, pastors, we normally try to, where can we get, or is it different? Is one thing, if we can, because I'm talking about the peacemakers in the role of the church and the pastors. We want to participate, but I'm not sure observers, you're talking about everything on that.
You please answer that one.
So I think the observers are those large groups that will essentially be working on over that election days. Whereas your peacemakers will be smaller groups organized in different ways. Oscar Swali and what is that called, that group? They have a large group that's operating. ECOC is another group that's operating, and they are drawn into the work that is happening across the next 3 months. So you can then be deployed, trained, deployed, and operating. Remember, a monitor or a peace worker doesn't need the same accreditation as an observer.
But we will send you all the detail. ECOC is under the patronship of the Archbishop Thabo Makgoba and Archbishop Stephen Brislin. It's a grouping of church and interfaith leaders. And in the olden days, they worked with parties. And so it's the Electoral Code of Conduct Observers Commission. So if you participate in this election, sign this document. Now you're going to conduct yourself in a very decent way. Okay? Behave yourself. The last couple of years, it has grown into a monitoring group also, but with limited capacity. And we will have meetings in the next couple of weeks. And I think the importance now is to say, how do we grow that grouping so that we have more monitors. But we will send you all the details. Friends, for the sake of keeping my eye on my watch, I want to go back to the panelists and I want to ask them, try and summarize what you've heard and give us from the cuff, off the cuff, 1 or 2 takeaways so that it'll simplify what you've heard. Anyone? Greg, what have you heard? You are part of a more younger generation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Braam. Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think from my side, the big thing that struck me is the need for almost voter education, especially among the younger generation. One of the, like if you look at the demographic of the younger generation, there's quite a big amount of us, a huge amount of young people who are eligible to vote but did not register. And one of the comments we get from them is, first, they are despondent because they don't think that a difference is going to come when they vote. And secondly, a lot of them say they don't know who to vote for. There's so many political parties out there that they feel like, they don't know who to vote for, so they'd rather abstain, which is, the wrong approach to take. So my take is, that we as a church, we've got a primary responsibility to, on a grassroots level, to educate our young people on the importance of voting and the impact of not voting, as well as information on the existing political parties. I think without being biased, giving them the relevant information and helping them make their own choice. But we need to put all the facts on the table. I think for me that is the big thing that we as a church need to really spend a lot of time on.
Voter education, and it's sort of a nice term to use, but do we really understand the challenge in front of us? Pieter.
Colleagues, there are a number of elements that I have not heard in the presentations. My central question is, what should be the role of the church? Now, normally we wait until too late, and then we get bogged down into the details and the mechanisms of voting. And this is what is happening here. That is a very important task because ultimately we have to vote. But it doesn't answer the question, what is the role of the church? Let me mention 3 things that I think the church must always consider. 1, the church must not allow a fusion of church and state. It's very important. It's a macro issue, and you might say this is completely irrelevant or it's too general, but when the church gets bogged down in party politics, especially in terms of representation, then we will end up where the boundary that is necessary between the state, a democratic state, and the church is blurred. When that happens, the church will begin and very quickly start to lose its own rationale. Why it is a church, what its particular contribution should be. Second point, therefore, the church must always address 2 matters. 1, what is the vision of the church for society? Now, in South Africa, I think our voice has become so muted that our country can say, this church doesn't have a vision for the society because we've neglected that extremely. We need to formulate a vision. And in that vision, we have to be boundary crossing. For instance, Erwin said, we cannot have a nationalist or an exclusivist position as a church. We have to reject politics that says we are here for the whites or we are here for the blacks or we are here for the coloreds. We have to adopt a vision that is inclusive. And that inclusive vision must cross boundaries. Now, there's 2 boundaries that I think we have to address. And unfortunately, friends, as we sit here, we are mostly middle-class people here. Some of you have great means, others have far less. I'm working in a congregation, amongst others, in Delft. There are times when my congregants tell me, Dominee, gaan huis toe. Dis nag. Jy kan nie in Delft rondry in die nag nie. It's too dangerous. When you have a divided society, and that division is no longer, for 30 years, not along the lines of black and white anymore. Some of you might not know that the biggest component of the middle class in South Africa today is not white, it is black. However, this divide is so deep that the middle class is forgetting what people are experiencing over there in Khayelitsha and in Delft and in Mitchell's Plain. Friends, when you have a normalized society, when things run relatively easy, although there's lots of complaints about corruption and whatever, but when the systems of society are still more or less intact, you will survive. But the day when the crisis comes, you will be in deep trouble. This country is heading towards that trouble because we don't have the visionary people in this country, it seems to me, that understands, or in the words of Ruben, we must have skin in the game. And the people on my side that I serve every day do not have enough. They barely know what will happen tomorrow and next week. In the meantime, the concentration of riches in South Africa is growing phenomenally. But we do not have the mechanisms to bridge. As a church, we must create it. We can. We say we have the resources, the spiritual resources. We can bridge it. Let me, I can say a lot more. Let me just say a last thing. And that is, as a church, our task, besides setting a vision and using that vision to criticize severely the shortcomings of a society, we have the moral basis to understand and do it. But secondly, we have to cultivate the kind of people, the virtuous people, that will say, I will not take shortcuts. I will observe the necessity for the rule of law, for instance. I will exercise my rights in such a way that when people look at me and hear me, they will know there is someone that they can depend on, a virtuous person. That is the task of the church. That is where the energies of the church come from. But in South Africa, you know, when you have a situation where 3/4 of the people in civil service dip their hands in the kitty for themselves, and then they get away with it, you create a generalized situation of corruption, and that virtuousness is absent.
Thank you, Pieter. Colin, any remarks from your side?
I think this has been a very valuable discourse that we've had through this morning in sharing and hearing from different people and insights that we've gained. And there are tremendous challenges facing not only us within the Christian church, but also within our community as a whole. If we look at the spectrums from where people are at, based on their economic status or their education, and so there's a lot that is needed. And ultimately, I think what Derrick was saying was important, and I'll take this more from an evangelical point of view, is that prayer is needed. Great amount of prayer is needed. And we haven't mentioned that the South African Council of Churches appointed, I think, the 5th of May as a prayer day for our Christian communities to be, actually in a sense for all communities, but for us as Christians, it's really important for us to be coming before God in prayer and to really be seeking the reality of God's face, not only for the education of voters, but also for the education of the choices we have to make based on the decisions that we are part of. Okay, are we looking at a values-driven decision? And that's part of what Peter was saying, in the fact that we're making the right decisions as to who we're going to vote for. But also what this has brought out, and this is a bit what Ruben was saying, is that we live in a community, in a society, and I come from a congregation in Goodwood, and it's really, in a sense, a multicultural community made up of refugee status people, or people that have come and become nationals, foreign nationals within our country, from Malawi, from Cameroon, and also from the DRC. And none of them have the ability or the opportunity to vote, but we have a tremendous number of South Africans from all different cultures, and the foreign nationals know the dynamics of what happens in Africa in their own countries, and it's important for us to use those to challenge the South Africans to make the right choices. But we live in a community that there's a large disconnect, and I think that's something that struck me from what Ruben was saying, that people are quite apathetic about coming forward to not only vote, but to just throw up their hands in the air and say, what is the point? And I think we need to just exercise what Ruben was saying, give them a visa to get out of the country. But I mean, like, that's the kind of challenge that we have. And in a sense, it's an urgency. Who knows where we will be after June this year, in terms of after the elections, where the country will be. Who knows where we will be in if we go back another 5 years in 2029. God knows where we're going to be. And are we active enough in terms of our prayer initiatives, in terms of our moving forward and educating people to make a difference, so that they are aware that they have this chance to vote, not only the young people, but the older people as well, And they're going to be even more confused, I think, when we talk about 3 sort of different choices to make. And they think, you know, gee, when I first voted, it was just, in a sense, maybe it was in the old apartheid government and these challenges. But how do we then educate people in a way that they could make a helpful and a useful contribution in the future of our country? Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. By the way, relating to the prayer, Erwin, on the 15th, coming Friday, there will be a prayer meeting. Just give the venue again. And the Muway Hall in Khayelitsha, starting at 10 o'clock Friday. And I want to say to all my white friends, if you want to really take a plunge into the other side of South Africa, Friday the 10th, Ronaldo, we must try and get something in Vrydag-nuus. Support Aaron with this initiative, a prayer day for the country, for the elections, the 15th coming, but we will send you all the information regarding that as well. Mlelo, you've got the final word, and Ruben, I'm going to ask you you took the less time, so you must say a final word to us as well. Mlelo? By the way, unashamedly ethical, IRCSA, Presbyterian, Methodist, previous chairperson of Wecken, Mbulelo Bikwani.
I think the church should do nothing. It's too late for the church to think now what to do. We are going to create confusion. Church must do nothing. Must wait until after the elections and then ask this question. It's late now to think of these elections as a church. And the biggest problem that the church has, because the church should be concentrating on the municipalities and the skill levels of municipalities and make sure it provides people that are professional, people that know what they are doing. The biggest problem we have is that we have a church with pastors who don't know what to do, who don't know why their church exists. But they have a church. And then you have municipalities with people who don't know what to do. And if you have this combination, people who are not getting services are running to the church. The church doesn't know what to do, doesn't know how to help them. And then we have all the problems that we have. The church must decide, do you want to be involved in the theology of mercy, or you want to be involved in the theology of justice? Theology of mercy is soup kitchens, and the theology of justice is to find out why do we have to serve people soup kitchens? Why don't they have their own food? And the church is busy with the theology of mercy. And it believes it's doing something. I'm not suggesting it's not something. Yes, it is. But if that's the end of it, if that's your destination, you're doing nothing. You're doing nothing. You still need to think, how do I move to the theology of justice? Where I'm going to ask the question, if there are people sleeping in the street, I don't just organize a bed for them. I organize a bed and I ask, why are there people sleeping in the street? Who's responsible for this? Finally, the former president, in fact, the biggest problem amongst the many problems of this country is that the presidency has been vacant since 2008. The presidency has been vacant. Ever since Thabo Mbeki left the presidency, all of the other people who got there, they don't understand what it means to be a president of a country. They just don't. They're incapable. They are just as good as a chief of a small clan somewhere, but they don't have the ability to become president of the country. So we have a presidency that has been vacant. That's why we are in this crisis. That's why we're in this mess. It's because the presidency has been vacant. In 2006, in Johannesburg, when Mvume Dandala was appointed as the General Secretary of the All Africa Conference of Churches, he was going to Nairobi and he was inducted. I fortunately had the pleasure of attending, and President Mbeki was there as a friend, and he was asked to speak. And he went up and he said, the problem that we have is to congratulate people before they work. I'm not going to congratulate Bishop Dandala. I'm just going to tell him, in 5 years' time, we're going to come back here and say congratulations after you have worked. And he said, if Dandala was already a secretary of the All Conference of Churches, I would ask him to accompany myself, Minister Lekota, and another minister, he said, because this evening at 12 midnight, we're going to Liberia. There's war in Liberia. We're going to Liberia. I would have asked him to join us. And he said, do you know what people are saying to me? They are saying, President, don't go to Liberia, it's dangerous. Don't go. And he said, and that's one of the days where I really loved this man. And he said, I have to go to Liberia because there are people who live in Liberia. And those people must live without war. Someone has to go to Liberia, and I'm going. Thank you very much.
Now we're picking up speed here. We're going to close. There's some very nice little sandwiches over there. I'm going to ask for once a politician to pray for the church. Not the other way around. Okay? So Ruben, will you please come forward? And if there's anything that you want to say to us in closing remark, and then you do a prayer for the church, please.
I should never have accepted this invitation. I would like to make a remark. It's a bit of a sobering remark. Think of it as follows. Statistics South Africa tell us that South Africa is more than 80% Christian. I see you're nodding, so I'm not completely out. So if we are a 80% Christian country, and the country is in the mess that it is in, at whose doorstep do we place this responsibility? I mention it because this is a gathering of church leaders here today. And Braam, perhaps you're being somewhat prophetic and maybe heretical by asking a politician to pray for the church. The background is that in my other life, I was also a church person. And I have a theological discussion with one of my local pastors there in the Cederberg. And I said to him, who carries the moral mantle, if that's a word, no? Of the nation? It cannot be a politician. And I'm shooting myself in the foot here because as much as I like to present myself as a community leader, because we have a community organization and not a political party, the reality is that we function in this political space. And so I've got to own the fact that I'm now a local politician. I'm the local mayor. And so as a local mayor, that is my plea to the faith community at large and the church in particular. And I'm going to make that plea in the form of a prayer, and with that I will close. Can I invite you to stand? Let us bow our heads and just take a moment to center our thoughts, center our hearts, as we reflect on all the things that we've heard this morning. And allow me to say the following. Gracious and holy God, we bow before you this morning, this afternoon, with humble hearts, recognizing that all of us have fallen short of that which is required of us. Dear God, I pray for these leaders bowed in your presence this morning, that you will imbue them with the courage that they need to provide this nation with direction, to speak truth to power. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, friends. Thank you for your presence. Please grab yourself a sandwich or two and a cup of tea or whatever. Engage with one another, and may God bless you all. Thank you so much.